What is up, guys? J'espère que vous allez bien, que vous êtes en pleine forme. Bienvenue sur le podcast Conversation Awesome avec Karmakin. A place where we speak Franglish, say the word awesome a lot, mais surtout un endroit d'inspiration et d'éducation pour vous aider à optimiser votre santé globale from the inside out. Mon nom est Claudia, fondatrice de Karmakin, et ma mission avec ce podcast est de t'amener dans un monde de développement personnel, d'optimisation d'habitudes de vie et de découverte so you can unleash your potential and live the life you truly want and deserve. Merci d'être à l'écoute. You're awesome. What is up, beautiful souls? Welcome if this is your first time on the show. Bienvenue si t'es ici à toutes les semaines ou si c'est ta première fois. Today I have an awesome guest for you. The conversation will be in English. Mais avant, je vous fais une petite introduction pour vous présenter l'invité awesome d'aujourd'hui. Donc, je reçois Jennifer qui est dans mon mastermind de business et de vie et de awesomeness on se connaît depuis, ça va tellement vite, au moins 1 an. Donc, ensemble, on a évolué, grandi, changé des choses dans notre business, appris des nouvelles choses aussi dans nos modalités de coaching et on a une approche qui se ressemble beaucoup au niveau de la santé holistique, d'utiliser différentes façons de coacher, différentes modalités, comme je disais, pour avoir des résultats vraiment awesome avec nos clientes. Donc, j'ai vraiment hâte de vous faire entendre la conversation d'aujourd'hui. Jennifer utilise beaucoup la science de la vie, qui est l'Ayurveda. J'ai toujours de la difficulté à prononcer ce mot-là. On en rit d'ailleurs aujourd'hui dans la conversation awesome. Et elle a une histoire personnelle qui est super inspirante. Donc, vous allez pouvoir en apprendre plus aussi sur les difficultés qu'elle a eues avec différents problèmes de santé et comment elle a appris toutes sortes de choses pour s'aider elle-même au niveau physique, mental, émotionnel et aussi pour aider ses clientes. So I'm pretty sure you ladies listening right now, you're going to relate to a lot of things that Jennifer shares with us today. Donc, sans plus tarder, je vous laisse avec la conversation awesome de la semaine. As always, if you have any questions, any feedback for me or for Jen, please let us know. Puis sinon, bonne écoute. All right, I'm sitting here with my friend Jennifer. How are you today?
I'm good, Claudia. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for being here. We're going to have an awesome conversation. I'm excited to share your story, how you help your clients, and even learn a lot for myself. So thank you for being here.
Of course. It's great to be here, and I'm super excited for today's conversation.
Yeah. So we've been in the same mastermind for over a year now, I would say. Time just flies by and time is an illusion, but we've seen each other grow a lot, evolve how we coach our clients, get clear on the messaging that we share on social media, tapping into more ways and more modalities as well to help our clients. So we're going to dive into what you've been doing in the last couple of months, which I find so fascinating and I don't know much about. So I'm curious and excited to learn more about that. But before we get started, I love to hear more about your story and how you ended up coaching people and the journey you've been on with your own health and your growth journey, your professional journey, and all of that. So if we could start with that, that'd be great.
Yeah, awesome. So believe it or not, and this is often a surprise to many people that meet me, I wasn't always healthy and I wasn't physically active. I never played sports. I never really had my thing when I was younger that kept me, let's say, maybe out of trouble. Maybe it would have been better if I did have something during that time. And eventually this really caught up with me when I was in my early 20s and I was not eating properly. I was very, very unhappy. I was in very toxic relationships, was staying up super late and just not really prioritizing my health. And that's when my world kind of came crashing down. That's when I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And it was a very, very challenging process for me, as it wasn't very easy to get diagnosed. It took about 1.5 years to really understand or get the test to show like, hey, what's going on with my body right now? Mm-hmm. So there were a lot of things happening during that time that were like, what? This is not normal. What's going on here? And yeah, along with the diagnosis came a lot of frustration, just kind of like victim mindset, like, hey, why is this happening to me? Like, why is my body doing this? But with that diagnosis, like now I'm able to look back at it. I was like, thank goodness this happened, because I wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for that experience. Because it showed me the importance, like, hey, like you're not taking care of yourself. Like what can you do to change this around? And that's where I really discovered, like, hey, what are all these modalities that I can use? Because I really did believe deep down, like, hey, like I can make this change. Like this doesn't have to be my world for the rest of my life. Like, even though they're saying like, hey, there's no cure for it. Like, hey, like how can I learn how to kind of reverse what I've done here? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And for somebody who doesn't know what Crohn's disease is, or can you share a bit of the symptoms that you were feeling? Or somebody might be listening and not have this specific diagnostic, but maybe they've had a diagnostic from the doctors before and they think that they're stuck with that forever. So what were some symptoms or signs that your body was sending that something was wrong, you know?
Yes. So the first thing I started to notice was I started getting a lot of gas and bloating. And I would feel just like very uncomfortable after eating anything. Mm-hmm. And then that turned into just like very frequent bowel movements. Like I was having like 7 to 10 in the morning. And I was like, okay, like it was really affecting like my schedule. I'd be like, oh my God, I can't do anything right now until like 12 o'clock. So that was very frustrating. And then just like very tired. I felt completely drained. I dropped about 20 pounds within a 2-week span. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then at one point I couldn't even swallow. I couldn't eat anything because my esophagus just felt so inflamed. And sorry for anyone who's listening who doesn't know what Crohn's is. It is an autoimmune disease, and basically your body is starting to attack itself, thinking that there's a problem, and it starts affecting you. It can affect you anywhere from your colon all the way up to your esophagus, and just causes a lot of inflammation, which prevents you from being able to absorb any nutrients that you're putting into your body. And then that's usually why a common symptom is diarrhea, because you're not able to digest because there's so much inflammation, and then it just goes right out of you, and hence weight loss.
Yeah, for sure. And without absorbing the nutrients, I mean, this is when we create deficiencies and lack of energy and like lack of recovery after workouts, and that affects our mood and our sleep. And I'm sure you felt it all during these couple of years of dealing with that and changing slowly your habits.
Yes. And then that did not come easy. It took a lot of unraveling to really see that those effects reverse themselves.
Mm-hmm. What did you start with in terms of changing your habits? What was the first couple habits that you really prioritized and started to focus on?
The first thing I started with was nutrition. It was like, okay, I want to make sure I'm putting the right things into my body. And at that point, it was like, okay, let's cut out gluten, let's cut out dairy, and give my body a rest. And, you know, at the time, it was hard for me to face this because I was like, I can't give up these things. I love them. But, you know, it ended up only being temporary. And I did it almost to give my gut a chance to reset itself. Mm-hmm. And that's when I started slowly like introducing things back to see like, hey, does this bother me, or is it something else? Or is it just all the inflammation that's there that anything I eat is going to bother me? And if I give it a little bit of a break, maybe that will help with everything. So that was definitely the first thing I experimented with when I was diagnosed.
Yeah. And that's such a key point here, because sometimes I coach clients and my approach is very like 80-20, right? So like having some foods that you love in moderation, guilt-free. But sometimes we do have to go into these more, I want to say, stricter protocols to make sure that your body has enough time to heal. So we won't take any dairy or any gluten. And then there's always that resistance and that bit of a fear that like, oh my God, I'm never going to be allowed or able to eat sugar or drink wine or eat chocolate. But no, that does not necessarily mean that you're never going to be able or allowed or, you know, eat those, your favorite foods. So I'm glad that you're able to share today that, yeah, you had to go through a stricter phase and a protocol that was probably very hard to follow at first, breaking a lot of habits, changing your nutrition. I mean, we eat a few times a day. Like it's a lot to handle. But the reason behind this was, like you said, to give your body a break, to give your gut like a reset. And then when there's less inflammation, look at that. You can have a glass of wine and not flare up for like 3 days.
100%. And, you know, that's really something I wish someone did tell me when I was researching, when I first was diagnosed, was that, hey, you will have to give up something, but it won't be forever. And that's what held me back for a long time, was having that all or nothing mindset where it was like, oh my gosh, this is it. I got to give it up. And then, like you said, there was that resistance that just really prevented me from just doing it for like a couple of weeks or maybe a month. And it would have helped me a lot faster.
For sure. And then learning how your body works and how your body reacts to different foods when it's at the most neutral, healed possible state, right? Because I've had clients telling me like, oh, whenever I eat avocados, like I have diarrhea right away. So I must be intolerant to avocados. But then we do like a cleanup and we remove all the like the inflammatory foods. And then, oh, I can actually eat an avocado. That was not the issue. So I guess that you reintroduced foods like one after the other, learning how your body reacted. Is there anything still to this day that you know is like a big, like, no red flag? Or were you able to reintroduce pretty much everything in moderation without any like big flare-ups?
So the key, and you've already mentioned this, is moderation. So I do eat dairy from time to time, but I'm careful how much I consume. I kind of know, like, if I go off track or I'm eating a lot of processed foods or eating out, if I'm away or something like that, that I know it will be easy for me to see those flare-up tendencies come back. But for the most part, I don't really experience a lot of sensitivities, which is amazing. Just certain foods, like random foods, like mangoes, for instance, they really bloat me up. And I know, like, okay, just don't do that. And like you said, I'm not sure. Maybe if I give myself a little bit of a break or go through a little bit of a cleanse, that, you know, if I tried that down the line and a couple of months, that it might change. And you know, like, I think it's important to remember that those sensitivities are ever changing, and you might get sensitive to things that you weren't sensitive to at one point. So it's all about kind of like recalibrating it every time and being like, hey, like what is going on? Am I stressed and that's why this is happening? Or is it because I've been eating out a lot? And just kind of weighing out your options rather than just like automatically assuming, oh yeah, it's got to be this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, our bodies are ever changing. They're always evolving. The food that we eat, like, is nothing compared to what we used to eat in the past, and it's going to keep changing. So even when you're aware of your changes and of your choices, it can be hard to always like find the right way to eat and the foods, but you just got to be aware and track the reactions that you have and do some cleanses once in a while, and be careful what kind of cleanses you do, obviously, but just take care of your body through nutrition first. Like, I totally agree. You mentioned stress. You mentioned that there was a lot of frustration when you got your diagnostic. I know, because I know a bit of your story, that you worked as well with the emotion piece. And obviously the gut is, all of our bodies are related, but gut health is related to your emotional health as well. So can you share a bit of that story, how you were able to more manage these emotions, do some healing, personal development, and how that actually helped you?
Yes. So with nutrition, which was the first avenue I took, that for me was, hey, how can I heal myself from the inside out? But it was only physical. And I almost hit a roadblock at one point. And I'm like, okay, like, I'm doing all the things. I'm eating all the right foods. I'm going to the gym. Like, why aren't I feeling better? Like, it was almost like I had this much more to go to get my health where I wanted it to be. And something was holding me back. And that something was my emotions, my energy, all this stuff I was holding on to that I didn't realize. And the way I discovered this was through Reiki Healing. And as you know, Reiki is just such a powerful tool, and one that's often overlooked. And it was from my first Reiki experience that, I've never met this Reiki master who's giving me a session. And she was able to just pinpoint so many things from childhood and from my relationships with people and just who I am, from just sitting there with her for half an hour before I even got onto the Reiki table. And for me, that first session, it was such a very powerful session for me that it gave me that inner knowing that, we are more than just like our physical health. Like we do need to work our emotions and work through energy, just like we would go to the gym every single day or eat a healthy diet throughout the day. We need to keep up with our emotions and make sure our energy is always flowing and that we're properly learning. We know how to properly let that energy go so that it doesn't weigh us down.
Yeah. So what are some emotions that you were able to notice, feel, let go? And how did you do that in terms of like more daily practices? Because I mean, in an ideal world, we will go to a Reiki practitioner every week or every day, but there's some tools and practices that can help stay in tune with our emotions and not, like you said, hold on to them. And then that creates a whole bunch of like stresses in the body and inflammation and then dis-ease.
Yeah. So fear and anger were really, really present. And I was able to understand that fear or anger really stemmed from my childhood. I had a really good upbringing and, there was nothing really major, but there was an incident that happened that, I was carrying that energy with me and I didn't even really know that I was, until the session. And then, a conversation was had like a couple of days later where I'm like, what, they're bringing the situation up? Like, I didn't even realize like how. I just saw the Reiki person and they brought it up. But yes, so anger was definitely present. And, that was a huge emotion that was present with the diagnosis of IBD, where it was like, why is this happening? I don't want this, like so much anger. So really understanding where that anger first came to life was from. I was able to work through it. And then that anger for the diagnosis just kind of dissolved itself. Yes. And then another one was just really not letting go. And I don't know if have you read You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay?
Yeah.
Yes. So, she has a symptom list at the back of the book and it lists like for Crohn's, the emotional block that it's related to is a fear of letting go. And for me, that was huge. I had been through a very significant relationship prior to the diagnosis. And, there was a lot of energy. Like I was still connected to this person energetically, like didn't really cut the ties. And then once I was able to really work on forgiveness with this person, from even not like just telling them, hey, I forgive you, but even just like journaling a lot about that and saying a little bit of an intention every single day allowed me to forgive that person and also to forgive myself. And that's when I really started to see my health improve.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because I feel sometimes we're so used to looking for like what caused the problem in a very specific physical body kind of way, right? But we don't always know, because we were not taught this in school. We don't always know. We're not really aware of like the correlation and the association and the integration of these emotions and what they do to our body. Like every organ has some emotions attached to it, like grief is, I don't know them by heart, but like if you hold on to a lot of grief, maybe something's up with your liver, like there's different parts of the body. And in Reiki, we work with the chakras as well, which are part of your body too. And if there's something stuck to it, it's an anchor that's holding you back. It's an anchor that is dragging you down. It's an anchor that will trigger these big reactions of fear, frustration, sadness, hurt, disappointment, when maybe we didn't really have to react this way. We could have just responded and noticed the emotion. So thank you for sharing that. I think it's going to bring a lot of awareness to maybe women who are listening right now and like they just can't put the figure on why they're always bloated or why they have that symptom or why the doctor cannot find what's quote unquote wrong with them. Maybe have a look and like, what are the emotions that I've been carrying for so long? It's fascinating. There's the book as well, The Energy Codes. I don't know if you've read it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember who it's from, but anyway, anybody listening who wants to dive into more like how our body parts are attached to like different emotions and energetically how we're sometimes like stuck, in different patterns. That's a great book for that too. So yeah, very cool. So from that experience, this is when obviously you started to learn for yourself and then eventually wanted to help people go through whatever you went through. So walk us through how you started to coach clients. I know you added a lot of different modalities in your coaching. So what was the process like to get you started in your coaching career?
Yes. So once I discovered all the modalities that helped me and helped make me feel so much better, I'm like, oh my God, I have to help other people do this. So that's when I started studying meditation and yoga, personal training, Reiki. And Reiki is actually how my business started. I had people coming to my condo and was giving them treatments. I remember at the time I was doing like, hey, win a free Reiki just to get people in the door and just like practice my skill. So that's where things started. And then it felt like, hey, I want to do more. And then I started learning meditation and teaching yoga, and then just ran with it and started teaching classes pretty much off the hop from graduating my teacher training. And from there, I became a personal trainer and did that for a few years. But I felt like the connection of the emotional side of things was not there the way I wanted it to be. So that's when I completely shifted and went online with my business. And of course, workouts are part of my client's program, but we look at things a lot, like a whole system where we're looking at their mindset, emotions, and their mental health as well as an entire being rather than just the physical side of things.
Yeah. Yeah. Our approaches are very similar. I was the same. Like I started with a lot of like training athletes and you're doing like performance type of like trainings and the workouts and the physical goals. And then added in the nutrition. It's like, all my clients who want to lose weight, it's not the 2-3 workouts per week that is going to help them. Right. So I added the nutrition in there. And I was like, everybody has their perfect workout plan. They know what they're supposed to be eating, but they're still not doing it or self-sabotaging or not getting the results. There must be something going on within the mental, the mindset, the emotions. And then I added the recovery piece as well, which is mental recovery, physical recovery. So we both have a very holistic approach to how we coach our clients because we are like a whole being with not just like we've been saying for 20 minutes, not just her physical body. So I love that you have that approach as well. And I'm sure you've seen how faster client change and have better results. And also how it's much more enjoyable to work on the different bodies and not just, force yourself to work out 3 hours a day and then follow a diet plan that's going to make you feel miserable. Like when you have this like holistic approach, it can actually be fun to like transform and heal and work on yourself.
Of course. And I also find that it's more, the results that clients get are much more long lasting and sustainable.
Absolutely.
Rather than, like you said, like going through a diet plan that might not be the best or can't be done for a very long period of time. So 100%.
Very cool. So pretty recently, I mean, again, time just flies by, but in the last 6 months, I think or so, you've been diving into this word that I can never pronounce. Ayurveda, I think we say in French. So I'm going to let you say it.
Ayurveda.
Yes. What is that? Let's start with that. So for somebody who just like me doesn't know how to pronounce this word, or maybe you've read the word before, what is Ayurveda? I'll say it in French. It's going to be easier.
Yes. So Ayurveda stems from India and it's an ancient healing modality and it's over 5,000 years old. It's considered to be the sister science to yoga. So yoga, we have our physical practice, spiritual, you're on your mat. Ayurveda is taking all of that, what you're doing with yoga and taking it off of your mat. It's a good way to put it.
Yeah, for sure. So nutrition, thoughts, I'm guessing, like what are the main components of whatever you bring in your life, not on the mat?
Well, the subject focuses a lot on, hey, like, how do we create a life of longevity? Okay. We want to learn how to prevent the disease from even happening and promote a lifelong fulfillment of happiness, which means physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, all together as a whole. And what's interesting about the subject is, and this is what I see a lot of people missing, is that, hey, like, not each one of us is exactly the same, right? So we're all going to need different foods. We'll need different movement routines. We're going to need different daily rituals that are going to help us be our true selves. And because oftentimes we think, oh, this is healthy, it will be healthy for me. But based on your body type and who you are and your internal energy system, it might not be the best fit. And that's what a lot of people miss sometimes when it comes to, their health journey.
Yeah, that's gold right there. I get a lot of questions like, oh, is this good or is this bad or is this healthy or is this unhealthy? And I'm like, my answer to that question is 95% like, it depends. Like something might look great on paper, but if it doesn't fit you, like I said, your inner energy, your schedule, even your interest, your morning routine, if you have kids or not, it might look amazing on paper, but it might not be the best fit for you. Yeah. So you work a lot with the elements.
Yes.
As part of, your coaching and that philosophy. So let's dive into that a little bit. What are the elements? So let's start with that, and then we can break them down and go more into details.
Okay. So as we look at Ayurveda, we look at the 5 elements, which I'll go through each one of them. But what it's the most important concept to remember here is that the universe needs these elements to kind of stick together and unfold. But what's also important to remember is that these elements are within each and every one of us, and we have these elements present, no matter who we are.
All of them. All of us.
Yes. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. So we'll start with the earth element. And obviously we'll think of the most obvious, planet Earth, the planet we live on. It's rocks, soil, the stable foundations for the roots to grow in a forest. And within us, this is our skeletal system. So these are our bones, our tissues, our cells. But then there's also an energetic component to it as well. When we are very steady and grounded, these are all signs that the earth element is present within us.
Cool.
Okay. And then we have the water element. So obviously we'll think of things like oceans, lakes, rivers, waterfalls, snow. But this is present within us through our emotions. And it makes sense. Like our emotions flow. They're never just like, hey, I'm just always this. It goes up and down and we go through this cycle. And that is showing us that the water element is present. So if the waves are going really fast, that is showing us that your constitution has a lot of the water element present. And then it's also within us in a more physical way, obviously thinking of things like our saliva and our tears, our blood, but it's also our vitality and our life in general, and as well as our ability to be able to eliminate any waste from the nutrients that we're taking.
Interesting.
Yes. And then that brings us to the third element, which is fire. So we'll think of obvious things like a fire outside when you're camping or the sun, but the fire element is present within us, as the fire element is needed for us to go through any kind of significant transformation. And that transformation could be big or small. It doesn't have to be like some crazy transformation. But once we're able to take ourselves from point A to point B, the fire element helps us do that.
Okay.
And then it's also required for our digestion, not only physically, like, hey, how are we absorbing and digesting the nutrients we're putting into our bodies, but how are we digesting life? Are we seeing life like, oh, like this is like I'm looking at things negatively through like a negative lens, or am I looking at it more positively? And it's that passion we have within ourselves, our intellect, and just like our perception and being able to process not only like, hey, like our sight, how do we see things, but how do we process what's happening to us? Like, for instance, with my diagnosis, it was like, why is this happening to me? But once I was able to switch that and use that fire element in a different way, rather than it being destructive, which the fire element can be, I was able to use it to transform. Right. So it can go one of two ways with the fire element, especially. And we all know fire, like a fire can really burn and get destructive.
Yeah. Makes sense.
So then that brings us to the next element, which is air. This is present with wind, oxygen, any kind of movement. Within us, the air element is strongly present with our creative side. So think of that person that's highly, highly creative. That person probably has a lot of the air element within them, right? Because we need to be creative. There needs to be that movement aspect. And again, movement's linked to air. So air is present. It's also in us, in our body. It's our nervous system. So our ability to go from fight or flight to rest and digest. But it's also our circulation because it's moving. And then also is how we go through changes in our lives, and also what we're able to tolerate within our lives.
Very cool. I'm taking mental notes here.
I see the light bulbs going off. Like, okay. Yeah. And then that brings us to the fifth element, which is space, or sometimes it's called ether. Doesn't matter which one you use, but in order for the other four elements to exist, there needs to be space for the existence of them. So, and obviously we think of space as, you know, our universe and where our planet resides, and all that unknown territory out there. But it's also within us we have boundaries. So boundaries create space, hence the space element is present. Yeah. But it's also within us more on the physical side, like, hey, like within our joints, our ability to move, like there's space in between the joints so that there can be movement. But it's also, we have our mouth and our ears, our nostrils, there's space within those. And then our ability to hear sounds, that is the link to the space element. And then we can get a little bit deeper where, our consciousness is the space element.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Very cool. So can you have too much or too little of one or the other element? Can you change the proportion of each element as you go through life? When you notice that maybe you have too much fire or not enough water, like how do you manage these elements so that it can serve you in your life?
Great. It's such a powerful question. And this is, I'm glad you asked this. So yes, we can notice that these elements can become very strong. Like, I'm sure we can all think of like, hey, that person, we know someone that's very fiery, they're always on the go. And you're like, wow, look at her go. She's just always going, doing it. But, what we don't know is like, hey, like, even though she's doing all the things, is she burnt out? Right? Because again, the fire element can become destructive. So yes, these can become overpowering. For instance, if there's a lot of air in you have a lot of anxiety. You might have a lot of ideas, but because there's no groundedness to them, they're just kind of floating around and nothing really comes. There's no transformation from these ideas. And in the study of Ayurveda, it's known that like attracts like. So a person who's very fiery is going to be naturally drawn to fiery things. And when we put fire and fire together, we get more fire. So to answer your question, how we would combat this, so I'll use the fire person for an example. If someone is finding themselves, the fire is too powerful, well, what is the opposite of fire? What's going to ground the fire? Water. Exactly. So water, or even the earth element, like, hey, let's get the fire to tame itself. right? And then it also depends. Sometimes the fire might not be burning enough. So we can use air to get the fire to move up, get that transformation to happen.
Right. So for example, adding in more movement in your life to tap into the air element would help also trigger a bit more fire.
With more movement in air, it will actually create more air, which yes. Okay. So yes, the answer is yes, but it depends what you're doing. So, if you have a lot of air and you start moving a lot more, that will make the air go. So it depends what you're trying to target. If you're trying to decrease the fire or get the fire flowing, then yes, you would put more movement.
One option, right? Just to give like a specific example, because how do I get more water in my life? You know what I mean? Like it can be hard to comprehend, like, okay, but like practically tomorrow morning, how do I balance this? What are some habits that are related to these different elements that people can start, being more aware of maybe on a day-to-day basis?
Okay, we'll start with someone who's very airy. They might find their thoughts getting away from them. And again, like they're anxious, thoughts, ideas are coming, but what do you do with them? So you always want to think, okay, what is the opposite of how I'm feeling? If I'm up in my mind, I'm disconnected from my body and I need to ground my energy. Perfect way to do this is using the earth element. So for example, hey, like I'm going to disconnect because airy people usually have like 1,000 tabs open on their computers. So just disconnecting from screens and going out into a forest and really just like being in the present moment and like just taking in the energy from the forest, maybe even hugging a tree, just like really like get that grounded energy to come within you, which will help combat the air element. You always want things working the opposite.
Very cool.
Yes, I can give one for each. So the fire, if the fire is very hot, a simple exercise would be like, hey, let me just go sit by a lake or ocean or river and just gaze at the water. Almost a form of meditation, but again, it's going to cool and tame the fire. And then for the earth element, which is when the earth element becomes very, very heavy, we might find we're feeling stuck and sluggish and stagnant. So we want to combat that with air, which like you used your example, movement. So getting this person to move really quickly will help that energy to move up, which is what we want to do, the opposite.
Right. Very cool. I'm like being aware of my own habits and my own elements right now. I need to journal about all of this after. But no, it's very cool. And it takes awareness, right? Because it's so easy to just stay in our patterns and in our day-to-day. And then you get to a burnout or you get to like a place of no energy or depression or like body, like dis-ease or sickness. So balance. And I think like remembering that, okay, how am I feeling right now? If it's not serving me, what is the opposite of that? And what element can I use to attract that opposite? I think it's a good way to put it.
Yeah. And even like, because sometimes it can get confusing with like, which element? Just think of the opposite thing you need, right? It's like, if you're feeling very hot and fiery and like you're go, what do you need? Grounding
to calm down.
Yes, grounding energy. And also noticing too, getting familiar with your tendencies in balance and out of balance, because then you'll be able to catch yourself quickly like, okay, what happened? I was feeling super determined yesterday and now I feel like I'm destructing, like everything's just self-destructing and I don't know what's happening, right? So that's a sign of, the fire's gone too high. So just knowing how to recognize yourself in balance versus out of balance will help you to navigate through this a lot quicker.
Yeah, for sure. Very cool. And then we add in the doshas to that. How is that related? What are those, the profiles? Because that's super fascinating for me anyway. So I'm sure a lot of people would love to learn about that.
Yes. So in the study of Ayurveda, there are 3 different body types. Okay. And so I want to be clear that, you're going to have all of these 3 of these doshas within you. We all have the 5 elements, But some of us at birth are born with more quantities of each element more than others. And this makes up our constitution. It makes up our structure. It makes up our energy, our mental space, our energy. So it all will make us a little bit have qualities more than other people. Mm-hmm. For instance, we'll talk about Vata, which is the first dosha, which is a lot of space and air element. So a person of this type is going to be very highly creative. They're going to be quick thinkers. They're super intuitive. They have that expansiveness to them. And they love to travel, and they're just free flowing and just always enthusiastic. Those are the positive sides of that. And the negative, when there becomes too much air within this person, or they don't properly maintain that energy, they're going to notice that they're very distracted and anxious. They might find that they're worrying a lot. And they're very indecisive, like, ooh, I shouldn't put that out there yet. No, I don't know. And kind of not going through with their ideas. And then they might even see some physical symptoms like constipation or weakness, maybe even like issues with insomnia, not being able to fall asleep. And then it can also affect their digestion as well. But as you can see, like, hey, like we all have the ability to be creative, right? Yeah. So like we all have this dosha within us, but for some of us, it's just more prominent than others.
Is there a body type associated to that, or is there any physical?
Yeah. So if you think of someone who's like really tall and they have like really long limbs, you know, that like lanky person, that is your typical Vata person. Because when they were born, like the air element was there to like get their structure longer. Mm-hmm. Right. So, and then they at birth, and then they get that like Vata mindset as they go through their lives. So yeah, your taller, lanky type person is typically a Vata type person.
Very cool. So what's the second one?
Second one is Pitta, which is fire and water, which is you're Pitta, I'm Pitta.
Yep.
And so a person of this constitution, they usually have like a medium structure physically. They might find that they have a pretty good metabolism, that it's like not like they can gain weight easily, but they can lose it easily too. Mm-hmm. But they're usually pretty just like they look strong. They're not tall nor short. They're kind of like they stem in the middle. And this type of person, you're going to notice that they're very passionate, driven. They're really good at making decisions. They're your typical entrepreneur, like CEO of a company. And they just have this, like, they're like always just goal oriented and driven. And they just have that like internal drive. But then when they're out of balance, this gets a little bit tricky, because then they'll find that they might feel judgmental of others. They'll start getting very impatient and angry in things like traffic. They might find that they're perfectionists, and then it prevents them from like putting their work out there. And then they might find that they get compulsive and obsessive over certain things. Yeah. So they got to be careful with overdoing it. Cause again, that will lead to burnout. And then the flame has like diminished, and it's like, can't go anymore. And then there can be no transformation.
I can relate to that.
So can I. And then, so that brings us to the third dosha, which is Kapha, which is a lot of water and earth.
Okay.
So this type of person, they usually are short and a little bit rounder. Sometimes they have issues losing weight. So this is your typical person that's like, hey, I carry a lot of weight, like I can't lose it. Mm-hmm. That's a sign like, hey, this person has a lot of the water and earth element within them. Characteristics, it's like, think of your loving grandmother that's just like, oh, like so loving and supportive. This is what a Kapha person will be like. They're very loyal. They're patient. They're emotionally secure. They'll have like the strong side to them, and they're very steady and grounded at whatever they do. But with them out of balance, it gets challenging because the water and earth become very sticky. So this type of person might find that they're very resistant to change, and they can become very stubborn. And they get really attached to people in their lives, places, situations. Like they hate change. So if you are someone that hates change, you have most likely have a lot of kapha going on. So that's just some tendencies to kind of check out and see like, hey, that is me.
Yeah.
It is. Hey, if it is, not a huge deal. Like it's the good qualities of all three of these doshas are amazing. But it is important to notice the contrast of it too. Like, oh, I do feel stuck. What can I do? And then now, like use the opposite element.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, finding out which profile you have. Well, we all have three, but like your main one. And then when you catch yourself being out of balance with the characteristic that you explained today, it's like, oh, I'm in balance. If my dosha is more like fire, then okay, now I know that I can use the other elements to tame that down. And then notice if I go back to the more positive aspects of these profiles. Yeah.
Of course.
It's all related.
All of it.
Very cool. How do you work with your clients using everything we talked about today?
Okay, great question. So with the doshas, you want to focus on three major principles. The first one being movement, the second one being nutrition, and the last one being the type of daily routine this person has.
Okay.
So when we start with movement, a person who is very airy or a vata dosha, they're going to be naturally drawn to something like spin class. That's like go, go, go. And there's lots of movement, which can get them feeling afterwards like, oh, I feel so scattered. Like, oh my gosh. Right. So I'm not here to say like, hey, like vata people don't do spin class. If you love spin class, that's great. But then how can we work with the other two areas, AKA your nutrition and your morning and daily routines, to help combat that excess of air? How can we add more earth into those other two to help you?
Yeah.
As for food, for instance, with Vata, they're going to be drawn to things like salad, which is very light. And that's a quality of Vata dosha. So again, is going to attract like, it's going to create more of what we don't want. So aiming to eat foods that are more grounding in nature, using like heavy oils and making sure foods are cooked is going to help work against the air element and balance it out so that this person can live in the positive qualities of Vata dosha.
Makes sense. Yeah. Do you have an example for a daily routine? Doesn't have to be Vata, but...
Yes. Yeah. So for Vata, they're usually rushing. They'll wake up like, oh my gosh, I have no time. Oh my God, grab and go, which we don't want. So as a Vata constitution, you want to give yourself a lot of time, especially in the morning, to be able to ground your energy through some breath work, meditation, visualization, and even journaling. It doesn't have to be all of them, just picking one or two, but also making sure your day kind of follows that rhythm where you're not just going go, 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 that you're spacing things out. And also incorporating the earth element throughout your schedule. Like, hey, how can I just take 5 minutes out of my busy day to just go sit down and do some grounding breathing exercises? Is a great way, an easy way to help combat the excess air.
Very cool. So I'm sure people who are listening are like, oh, I want to know which dosha I am. So you have a quiz?
Yes. It's on my website. So jennifertabrizi.com and you can find it right there. It's first thing you'll see.
Yeah, I'll put that in the show notes and share with us. Like send us a DM on Instagram or a message and let us know with which one you are. And I've taken the quiz myself like a while back. And the resources that you give out after via email is like super interesting. So you give a lot of knowledge to understand like what the type is, what it means for us, the different characteristics like we talked about today, but also some actionable like tools and strategies and stuff that we can do to make sure that we stay within the balance of the elements. And so I would definitely recommend you guys to go on her website, take the quiz, let us know which profile you are. And anywhere else we can grab your content or support you, or if anybody wants to work with you to use these elements and everything we talked about today.
Yeah, well, I did a workshop on this and it's available for download for free. So that can also be found on my website.
Perfect. So I'll add that in the show notes. This has been fascinating. So I'm going to go journal and be more aware of my different elements. So I'm sure there was a lot of curiosity today from our listeners. So if you have any more questions for Jennifer, like reach out, go follow her on Instagram, go do your quiz and use that as a tool, to be healthy and to live a more balanced, fulfilled life. Like there's so many things out there, and to see this as a whole, like you have your human design, your astrology, your nutrition, your training. Now you have your doshas and all these amazing like ways to think and philosophies and medicine and natural holistic health. It's like, for what you said, like 5,000 years ago that they said,
yes.
Like ancient wisdom, like we have to use this. Like there's a reason why we still talk about this all this time, So thank you for sharing your knowledge and your passion. And yeah, I always finish my interviews with one last question for my guests. So what is your favorite quote and why?
My favorite quote is, it's not really a quote, but more of a saying. Well, okay. It is, instead of asking the question, why is this happening to me? Starting to ask, why is this happening for me? So it's, again, not a quote, but more of like a changing the way you're thinking about something. And the next time you catch yourself being like, oh, why is this happening? See if you can turn it around and ask yourself that different question, because then it gives you a different outlook on it. And you're like, oh, you know what? Maybe I won't care so much that this is happening because I know I'm trusting that this is happening for good. Mm-hmm. That's why it's important to me.
Yeah, I love that. Tony Robbins, this is what he talks about all the time, like the victim mode versus like the let's find a solution and the lesson that needs to be learned in this moment. Like it's happening for me, and it just changes everything. So thank you for sharing that. Thanks, Jen. I appreciate your time today. This was awesome.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Yeah. J'espère que cette conversation awesome t'a inspiré. Et d'ailleurs, I would love to hear back from you. Rejoins Karmakin sur les réseaux sociaux and tag me in a post pour partager ce que tu retiens de cet épisode. Je serais vraiment grateful aussi si tu pouvais me laisser un rating and review pour le podcast. Ça me permet d'avoir un impact positif sur plus de gens comme toi. Merci beaucoup d'avoir été à l'écoute, and until next time, je te souhaite une journée awesome.